Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about some potential high-value free agents in the 2020 NBA free agency class. And what we're looking for here are, as an example, a couple of years ago, Brook Lopez was signed for a very small amount of money to the Milwaukee Bucks. Nobody really was all that excited about bringing him in. He became an incredibly important player for that Bucks team and then signed, a bigger deal the following year. So these are some players that maybe are being overlooked, maybe are a bit under the radar, that can really help some NBA teams next year and potentially get themselves a bigger deal the following year. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. But really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every day. And leaving a like rating is a great way to let me know as well that you are enjoying the content, and it helps get out the video to more people on YouTube. You can also hang out with me at twitch.tv/spolo_TD. I stream a guaranteed 5 times per week over there. And you can hang out with people in this community outside of the videos themselves in the Discord server, which is linked down in the description below. With those things said, let's go ahead and get started with the list. And we'll begin with a player that I think's been a little bit forgotten about, and that is Tristan Thompson. And you can say what you want about, what you think of Tristan Thompson over the last couple of years as a player. But if all you're asking this guy to do is to defend and to rebound, he's going to be a really, really productive player. I still think he's a starting caliber big in this league, depending on the situation. Somewhere like Boston would be a nearly ideal fit for Tristan Thompson. And he's still a bit underrated as someone that is, a relatively mobile big guy. Isn't going to give you great rim protection, but if you're talking about defending in ball screens and things like that, he can certainly do some good things. And again, one of the better offensive rebounders in the league over the last, handful of years in his career. So Tristan Thompson is a player that I think people are overlooking a little bit, and you could find some good value if you're a team like Boston, if you're a team like Miami, or any of those other teams around the league that need depth at the 5 spot. Tristan Thompson would be a player that I think would be worth taking a look at, as would the next player on this list, Mason Plumlee, another kind of overlooked player, someone that isn't really talked about a ton with the Denver Nuggets. And I'm not trying to say that this guy's going to go out and average 20 and 10 for somebody next year, but Mason Plumlee provides a bit of a unique skill set, someone that can defend pretty well, can rebound, some rim protection, but is also a pretty good passer. Like you're not going to, run your second unit offense through Mason Plumlee or anything, but he's also not going to cause the ball to stick. If he does get it, he's going to move from side to side. He's going to, find guys on back cuts, find guys from the 3-point line. He's not Nikola Jokic, and nobody's saying that he is. But Mason Plumlee is another guy that if you're looking for a potential value signing this offseason, which is what this entire video is about, and you need depth at the 5 spot, I would take a pretty hard look at Mason Plumlee. Another player that I'm going to be moving on to now on this list is also a member of the Denver Nuggets, and it is Paul Millsap, a player that is coming off of a huge contract. He's not going to approach anything close to those numbers again, but I think that as a result of, a bit of an overpay by the Nuggets over the last couple of years, people are going to undervalue what Paul Millsap can do. Now, he's not going to be great at any one thing, right? But he's a bit of a Swiss Army knife, can space it a little bit, can score it a little bit, can kind of defend, can kind of rebound. And as a player in the front court, that's pretty valuable for a couple of teams around the league that really are looking for some versatility at those front court spots. Maybe someone like Dallas, someone like Houston, or a team like Houston even. You could get Paul Millsap for potentially like $6, $7, $8 million a year this offseason, maybe even just on a 1-year deal, and he could have a pretty big impact on a couple of teams. So that would be another guy to take a look at. Now we're not going to be talking about big guys the entire list, because now we're going to be moving on to someone that, again, has been forgotten about a little bit, but I think can be a productive wing, and it's Mo Harkless, who was moved to New York in the Morris trade from the Clippers. And I don't know, I've always had this weird affinity for the game of Mo Harkless. He has tremendous length. He can defend a little bit, can rebound a little bit, can rim protect just a smidge. And if he's knocking down 3-point shots, which he did at times in LA and in Portland, Mo Harkless is one of those players that, as we talked about in this, the biggest need for every NBA team this offseason in those videos, a lot of times we talk about teams needing wings, and Mo Harkless is a player that I think can help some of those teams on the wings as a guy that can do some things defensively, and if he's knocking down shots, is a pretty good 2-way player as well. So keep an eye on Mo Harkless. Next up is another perimeter player, someone that I think gets overlooked a bit as one of the better shooters in the league from a non-star perspective, and it's Justin Holiday. This guy is a really, really good 3-point shooter, a volume 3-point shooter at a relatively high percentage. And I don't know if it's because of the Indiana thing. I don't know if it's just because he's not that big of a name, but Justin Holiday should be on the radar of a handful of teams throughout the league that really, really need spacing, whether it's Philadelphia, whether it's New Orleans, whether it's a team like Houston that wants to continue to add to their volume 3-point shooting roster. Justin Holiday is another potential fit, and every single player we've talked about to this point in this list isn't going to be abnormally expensive. I would be shocked if any of these players signed a deal worth over $10 million per season. And again, as we saw with someone like Brook Lopez a handful of years ago, you can get really good value in those players that maybe aren't demanding a ton in free agency in a particular offseason. But once they go to a specific situation, their value rises pretty dramatically. And I'm not saying every player on this list that's going to be the case for, but you're kind of understanding to this point the kind of players that we're targeting and talking about on this list. Next up is a player that I can't give up on. I've talked about him in a couple of different videos. It's Dario Saric. I still think that there's something there with Sarge. I still think that he can be an interesting floor spacing, good passing, okay defense type 4 with, kind of doing some things at the 5 spot on occasion if you really want to go small. And I still think there's something there. Again, someone like potentially Houston, even a Philadelphia reunion could be possible here. Dario Sarge is not going to be that expensive. I don't think the Suns are going to be incredibly motivated to bring him back, but the skill set is certainly there. If he wants to stay and play in the NBA rather than going back overseas, Dario Sarge is a interesting prospect, and still a young one as well that I think is worth taking a flyer on, depending on the situation around the league. Next up now, second to last on this list, we go back to the big guys again, and it's Nerlens Noel. And this is a player that a couple of years ago we thought was going to get a pretty big contract. It didn't work out. He ended up in Oklahoma City on one of those value contracts. And I still think that Nerlens Noel is relatively undervalued around the league. This is a guy that can be a really good defensive player, is not going to provide you a ton on the offensive end outside of garbage points, but generally his blocks and steals numbers are pretty high. Not that those are end-all be-all indicators of a player's defensive impact, but I would not overlook Nerlens Noel and the possibility that he really helps a handful of teams around the league. Again, we go back to those teams that we talk about over and over again that need depth at the big man spots. We talk about Boston, we talk about Miami, we talk about Houston, we talk about potentially Dallas. There are other teams around the league to be mentioned there as well that could use some depth at the 5 spot. And Nerlens Noel has shown that as a backup 5, he can be a valuable player there in Oklahoma City, still relatively young. And I think there's a good amount of upside there as well with Noel, that depending on how he's used, he could even be a starting caliber 5 still in the NBA. So do not overlook the potential value of Nerlens Noel on the free agency market. Next up now, we have DJ Augustin, who has been kind of one of those value players for Orlando over the last couple of seasons, because they've struggled so much to put together a good backcourt there in Orlando. But DJ Augustin can do a lot of good things for your basketball team. He can set things up. He can run plays. He can make shots off the ball or on the ball. He's a pretty good playmaker as well. It's not going to be incredibly dynamic. Isn't going to be getting in the lane every other possession. But if you're looking for just a steadying presence at the point guard spot, DJ Augustin is not a bad option. And we've seen around the league this backup point guard thing has been an issue for a lot of teams. When you go back and look at a player like Monty Morris that's pretty nice off the bench for Denver, any of these other teams around the league that have looked and tried for a long time to figure out the backup point guard spot, DJ Augustin could be their solution. A lot of teams just try and get by with whoever their secondary or third playmaker is when their star is off the court and on the bench. And sometimes that can take away from the whole flow of the offense because that one guy is just isolating or in ball screens the entire time when they're used to being off the ball when the other star, is on the court with them. So having someone like DJ Augustin on the floor that can run the offense, that can make things flow the way that they're supposed to, set up those important players for shots and spots that they're comfortable in, that backup point guard spot is something that I think is being undervalued, and DJ Augustin is a player that certainly could help teams in that respect. Now, every single one of these players have a team that I think initially would be interested in re-signing them. Their current team, I think, would be at least relatively interested in almost every scenario here and bringing these players back. So there's no guarantee they're actually going to hit the free agency market, but whether you're looking at a team like Denver with Mason Plumlee or the Knicks with Mo Harkless, there's probably directions that those teams would rather go than bringing back those players respectively. Again, you look at Paul Millsap, they're going to probably make a run at it, but if a team really goes out there and says, you know what, this is our guy, this is our potential undervalued player of this offseason that we want to target and we want to bring in, I think each of these guys are certainly available and could certainly be impactful. And yeah, there you have it. That's going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. I understand that this one is a little bit more, niche-like, where we're talking about some basically role players for the entire video, but I still thought it'd be fun to talk about some players that I think possibly could be undervalued in this 2020 free agency class. It's not an incredibly talented one. It's not one that's going to blow you out of the water with the big names here. That's going to be 2021. But still, there's value in every free agency class, and I think some of these players could represent a good amount of value. But as I said, I thank you guys very much for watching. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.